So I just want to be clear. Debbie sent me a piece that developed out of a mentor luncheon. There was a presentation about the race to, there was a presentation about moving heaven and earth to get patent arrangements working across countries, across borders. In the early stages of the COVID crisis, when Italy was tremendously suffering from a lack of ventilators. And there was a luncheon that Debbie hosted for the Mentor Project, in which someone spoke. I mean, it isn't something that I normally would have tuned into had I seen the banner, you know, sort of the intricacies of the legal maneuvers to get this through whatever legal red tape was required across countries. It didn't sound promising. And then you listen to it, and it was the most fascinating detective story. So many intricate moving parts, started with someone's passion. This dire news striking the ears of a Nobelist physicist who knew how to solve the problem of lack of ventilators with his knowledge, mechanical knowledge. And that set in motion a multi-country collaborative effort, the best of science, just the best of international cooperation, and kind of a race because lives were at stake. Debbie wanted to tell the story. I really urged her to tell the story. I thought it would make a really good story to tell. And Debbie has sent me pretty much of a draft of the story. And I mean, Debbie, I think it's beyond just a story. I mean, I think what you sent me is very good, but I think it has so much drama of such a kind that we don't normally hear about, and that I think it should get into the hands of people who put dramas forth for the public for a living. Okay? I know one person, I would certainly run this by them. Happens to be my son, one of my sons, but it's not the kind of thing that he does, but he may know people. I would want to see it, at any rate, I would want to see it published somewhere to be talked about. We'll discuss it, but I think it should be seen because I think it has potential for a drama in a realm people don't think of normally as dramatic. You just don't think of physics, unless you're racing to make the atom bomb. You don't think of physics as being very dramatic. This is really very dramatic, and this is saving lives, and ending a war, if you will. Yeah. So I just think it's an interesting story. It's well on its way to being told really, really well. And I'll be happy to go over some of the little details. You really do get a sense of what's at stake when you start reading it. The drama really comes through. And there's just some little details that I think are really terrific. So you get a sense of how in 10 days, these people around the world, many of whom had no idea who else was working on the project. They were all working on different aspects of it. But everybody just rushed together and pitched in their expertise. And it came together faster than any of us could get toilet paper. And that is such a gorgeous, concrete touch because it really gives you a sense, in this particular case, of how things moved and what was going on the ground for the rest of humanity. Yeah, we were struggling to get toilet paper, and these guys, in their Nobelist, idealist think tanks were solving the problem that the world was facing at that moment. So I think there's a great story there, Debbie, and I want to applaud you for taking it on, for doing it, for getting it 95% there, and you're going to get it the rest of the 100% of the way after we talk. So I'd be happy to be very specific about that later, and discuss it.
I'd love that. I really would. And I want to thank you because, this was not my story to tell.
Well, you always say that, but I think that's your humility speaking. It was your story to tell because you hosted the mentor project that brought this story out, that presented it to the public. So please step into the limelight, Debbie Heiser, take a bow, and recognize that, yes, you were in a position to tell it. I appreciate your humility in recognizing that there were other people who were very central in moving the parts of this story. But that doesn't mean you're not in a position to tell it. And of course, your telling of it is giving credit to absolutely everybody else who played a major role in it. So.
Well, I have to say that when it was presented, and this actually is co-written by myself and Jen Snow, who Jen actually really, and we heard from Yura was also involved. They both are mentors with the Mentor Project, and Jen is on the board, and so is Yura. But Jen was one of the real people behind the scenes, just making, like getting the sort of the pieces put together. Everybody's so humble with this whole story. So for me to step in, I felt like, okay, I'll tell this story, but it felt awkward.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. When I first presented all of the ideas to you, as you saw, they were super raw. It was like, I just gave you a pile of words. And then your reaction to that gave me the courage to go ahead and put it into a more solid way that allowed me to feel like I could tell this story, even though I wasn't present during the actual unfolding within those 10 days. I was sort of at the sidelines hearing bits and pieces from people, but I would love to see this story make it beyond an article, because indeed, these people are regular people. Yes, they're brilliant, but they came out and they dropped literally everything they were working on and got all sorts of people around the world to stop everything they were working on. And this can save so many lives. A third the cost of what it is. We're hoping to send them to Africa. Africa, we found out, only has one for every 3 million individuals, one ventilator, one. So this creation can save so many lives in other countries because they made it open source. It's just mind-blowing to me that no one came in and said, I want to make $1 million off of this.
Right.
I'm giving my knowledge away, and everybody else that stepped in and all the companies that said, we'll let all of our employees work on this instead of what they're supposed to work on. Just beautiful. It's really like one of those, it's just such a good life story that was in the middle of a pandemic when everyone is in panic and blaming countries and blaming individuals and looking to, throw shade on anyone they could. And here were these quiet heroes changing the world. Just loved it.
Yeah, we'll save that because that's got to go in the piece.
Okay. Okay.
So I just want to tell you that when you say you feel that it's not your story to tell, that is the life of journalists. It's almost never our story to tell. I'm one of those journalists. who didn't grow up writing about myself. I mean, I'm not the story. I'm always reporting someone else's story. It's never my story to tell, but I feel that I can tell a story reasonably well to get someone else's story out, and do them a favor because I have tools. So I know how to get the story from them, perhaps in a way they might not have demanded of themselves. And I know how to get it out and get it seen. So, so I think that this is the case of anyone in possession of a story that has value, almost has an obligation to get it out, get it told. I've been contacted over the years by people who give me information. They know they're not a person who can tell a story, but who'll contact me and say, hey, this is happening. Are you aware? Here are some contact people. Dig into this or look into this or report that. And so we journalists and storytellers are the ones to get these stories told. But I think anyone who knows of a really good story has and this one in particular, at this particular moment of time where we've got these forces just undermining science at every step of the way. And here you see everything that's good about science, plus it's a drama, plus it's international, plus it's all of these things, plus it still has room to save more lives. I just think this is really a great story worthy of being told. So don't feel that you're not the person to tell it. It's almost like you're a bystander. Bystanders have obligations as well. And maybe your obligation is contacting someone who can tell it, seeing that it gets told. But in your case, also, it's not as if you don't have skills that you can't tell it. So you do. So
thank you. That gives me a feeling of validation, and coming from you, I appreciate that, and I take what you say and feel okay about it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is like, what is the story? What is the story that has to be told? And I did a piece an issue and a half ago for Psychology Today called "The Healers Are Hurting," on the crisis physicians are facing. Yes, they're facing a crisis during the COVID epidemic, but before the COVID epidemic, physicians were facing a crisis. And it's that story that I wanted to tell. And I first got wind of that story maybe a year and a half ago, when I was approached by a physician who, on the West Coast in Seattle, she had, of her own, using only her own resources, she had started a suicide hotline for physicians. The fact that we are in a position in America to have a hotline, a suicide hotline for physicians, kind of blew my mind. So this, I could not persuade, at the time, I couldn't persuade anyone at Psych Today that this was a story to be done. And I really wanted to do it very badly. And then but I didn't let it drop. I mean, I kept a file on this. I kept contact information with that physician. And then as these things happen, my editor-in-chief suddenly got religion and heard from someone else who was writing a book on suicide, about suicide among physicians. And that was all I needed to say, go, we've got to do this. And So it became my way of persuading her, hey, it's time to do this. And so I made some strategic phone calls and did a lot of digging in a lot of places, as I usually do with an article, to find what are the dimensions of the problem before I know where to focus. I'm really exploring what's the perimeter of this thing? How big is this? What does it encompass? And that is really before I have to do that before I decide where to jump in, no matter what turned me on to the story in the first place. And one of the things I discovered was that two physicians, one affiliated with Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston, a trauma surgeon there, Harvard affiliated, considered one of the top hospitals in the country, and another physician who had been doing work for the Department of Defense and approving grants. The two of them, their paths had crossed because the trauma surgeon had a grant through her office. She is a physician, a psychiatrist who was doing this work. And they, as people whose paths crossed, began having conversations. And they began talking about the crisis among physicians from their separate perspectives. And everywhere this crisis is reported as burnout, and I have no doubt that there is a serious epidemic of burnout among physicians. But why do you get to suicide? And I think there's something really deeper there. And it was through them, they opened my eyes to the role of moral injury, of how doctors today, how medicine is practiced today. It's not individuals in their little comfy private offices. Most doctors are employed by large organizations, and how the pressures put on doctors violate almost everything physicians were not just trained to do. It went deeper than their training. It was the whole entire ethical foundation of doing no harm, of helping. And that gave me a window that I didn't have before. And I didn't just tell their story, I told lots of other stories, but it started me off looking at a lot of elements of how physicians are trained. Couldn't talk about why physicians are killing themselves now without talking about who goes into medicine, how do they get trained, what's the one lesson they learn above all. And so that became the story. But it was this collision of information about suicide and burnout and moral injury with this cultural development of increasing rates of suicide among physicians. And that information came together. I felt that was an important story for the public to know. I think everybody has a doctor. Hopefully everybody has a doctor. And I wanted people to know what was going on with their doctor, because you don't see this. This isn't the face the doctor presents to any patient walking in their office. You don't see the 2-foot stack of lab reports that are waiting for them to go through. You don't see the 20 patients in the ER needing their help. They come in and give us what attention they have when it's our turn in the examining room. And we don't see all the other stuff. They keep that from us. So in a way, we have no idea what's going on. I wanted people to have a clear idea of what was going on, because I felt that this is this this is a real dilemma that deserved attention. It was affecting the care that physicians were giving you, me, everybody else. And oh, by the way, this is one more example of how medical care in our country, the medical care system, isn't working for anybody. It's not even working for the doctors who are the prime movers in it. And so I felt that was a story worthy of telling. And different stories come together different ways. Usually, for me, the sweet spot is some piece of new information, some cultural development that we didn't understand before, or that maybe we didn't even see before, and that I can shed perspective on this new development with the information that I have. Now, for some people, just the fact of a new cultural development or a new piece of news is enough for a story. And that's, you see a lot of that in newspapers. Newspapers also do larger stories of the kind that I do. So my sweet spot sort of on the cultural edge, so it's always where the culture meets with information from psychology and to some degree biology to help explain our lives and where we're moving as a world. And so I like to do that and open people's eyes so they can see what's going on. And for me, what's really interesting is that one of my primary sources, and this is probably because I have such great access to these people, is psychologists. Now think about this. Psychologists, clinical psychologists, are sitting in their offices listening to people's problems day in and day out. As the world moves, there's an evolution of problems. Now, what's really interesting is so psychologists are often the first people to hear of new problems that crop up in the culture, because very often they create problems in living or maybe problems in relationships that people bring to clinical psychologists. Not all clinical psychologists are really good at discerning what the new strand is of information or a complaint walking in their door. But what to me is really interesting is that most cultural switches often start with an individual complaint, with people not realizing yet that a whole bunch of other people share this problem. And that's really where, to me, really good clinical psychologists come in, because they say, hey, wait a minute. I saw someone last month who was complaining of the same thing. What's going on here? And then maybe they start digging. And then I like their phone number. So I call up and say, hey, what's new happening? What are you seeing that you haven't seen before? What complaints are you hearing that you haven't heard before? And that's often a way that I learn of things that are dissonant in the culture that individuals are wrestling with, that are probably not individual problems, but the individual experience of discomfort, distress, gives me the clue that something is happening. So for me, that's one way of finding stories. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate over the years to be able to talk to people and to get stories that are right at that edge and that signal some sort of cultural shift. So I think I'm sitting on one now that I want to beat into an article and persuade the editor-in-chief that we need to do as an article. I think it's a really big one. I think it pertains to an awful lot of people. And I think it has to do with the way we look at disease and disorder and things like depression um, other such mental health problems. Um, so I think there's some shift going on that I'd really like to document. But so stories are everywhere, Debbie, and we have an obligation to tell them because they really do influence people's lives. Sometimes you tell them for the wow factor, but sometimes you tell them not just for the wow factor, but I mean, it's always nice when the wow factor is there, but you tell them because here's the thing about your story. It isn't just the wow factor. There's plenty of wow factor. It is a way of showing people what can be done. They wouldn't do exactly the same thing, but you read it, and one of the messages you take away is, hey, I can do something. If some other crisis with some other insoluble problem arises, it gives you the knowledge that we don't have to be passive victims. We can start a ball rolling with a phone call. You know, hopefully we have a Nobelist on our Rolodex, you know, or on our phone record, and start the ball rolling. So those stories become inspiring. You put them in the back of your mind and say, oh, I remember that. And these were just ordinary citizens who decided to take action. It was like, oh yeah, I think I can solve that problem. And that's a really good reason to keep telling these kinds of stories. Aside from the wow factor, they really do give people, this is my favorite word, a sense of possibility. And I think we all need a sense of possibility all the time. Yesterday, I lost my sense of possibility. It sort of disappeared for a day while I was cleaning toilets, but it's back. So I think that's, you know, sort of the good way of how stories get done and why we need to keep telling stories, because they really can have life-changing implications for people. So
I think this is helpful because the way you explain it, prior to that, I felt like it was not my place to come and tell this story. But you're right. I think that we all do need to tell a story that comes our way, because it makes it isn't about me. This story doesn't have me in it, but I'm able to get it out there and to a different audience than, say, engineers.
Right.
And I think that every one of us has those stories that we see or hear of ordinary individuals doing things that are really interesting. And we often, and I'm so guilty of this, just filing it away as, wow, that was great. And then it's gone. And I think that, you know, the more we can get these stories out, the more it won't seem like an absolute anomaly in the world. And we'll get to see more of them as this is what we all do.
Right. And at this particular juncture in our cultural history, it also happens to be a story about science, which is, you know, just taking one on the chin.
Right.
And, you know, I do want people to see what a really glorious enterprise it is. And in some ways, you know, it's such a model in so many ways for knowing, and its impartiality, and it doesn't really care where an idea came from. And there are independent ways of verifying information. These are tools that we can all use individually in our own heads, in our own lives, you know, how to evaluate information, that kind of objectivity. So, and then you have people like Clark who do work and have their own stories to tell based on their insights. So Clark's in a position to talk about harvesting the truth, which is a great angle on um, lies. You know, everybody's interested in finding the liar, spotting the liar. And Clark has this great other angle, and he's seen that angle, and he does work that knows how to slice into it. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more from Clark about the work. Your sound, you're muted.
I want to say before he hops on, because this is also leading.
Sorry about that.
Liana is on the live stream, and she said, and this is true, and this leads into your work, Clark, that stories are the emotional glue of our well-being. And she said, as a descendant of Persia storytellers, she's always grateful for the gift storytelling brings to our world. And Clark, you really do bring out a lot of what people are talking about and thinking and feeling and all of that. So I'll put it out there, but I just wanted to let you know what was happening in the chat, guys.
Yeah, I do want to say the stories aren't always emotional. I mean, but
that's true.
But they catch us. There are many ways we get hooked by them, and I think it's important to tell them. I mean, the story that you're telling, Debbie, I don't see it so much emotional as, but there's drama in it nevertheless, by the timing, the events, what was going on, the deaths happening. So there was drama, and it just grabs us for that reason. Now, if you want to say that's emotional, yes, but the pacing of the elements of the solution to the problem, that is really the glory in that story. So Clark, I don't want to take away from the story that you have to tell, which I think is.
Oh, I'm so excited about reading what Debbie is writing. And I texted her, wrote in the chat, I teach negotiation, so I'm always looking for these stories about how people collaborate with each other and what is it that makes that possible, and how it's not just what you want or what they want, but what they all want. And so it's been so fascinating listening to you, Hara, about how even you, as the former editor of Psychology Today, you in a sense had to negotiate to get this wonderful story published about what doctors are going through.
Right, I did have to negotiate. Now, I have to say that my track record's been pretty good. So, you know, I have an edge on getting to do it. But there are many considerations of what stories we do. But yes, I mean, I have to say that I have to become a spokesperson for every article that I want to do, and I sometimes have to really persuade people, this is the moment to do this piece. Rather than, yeah, we'll do it, but we'll do it sometime down the road. So yeah, I have to negotiate all the time. Yeah.
It's interesting because the word negotiate, like the word lie, you might have noticed I said collaborate at a certain point rather than negotiate. And I partly say harvesting the truth rather than lie detection for a parallel reason, which is that people have a negative association, and Liana said emotion is so important. People have a negative set of emotional associations and even just emotional triggers when it comes to the words like lie detection or lies or negotiate. And I actually finished my first piece for you. I have a technical question about citations. I'm going to send it to you tomorrow. And what's interesting is it's a great example of how the way you frame it can get people to be motivated or not, which is that I'm talking about how people's ability to survive COVID depends on knowing what risks the people they associate with are taking. So then you can choose how to calibrate your interactions. If you know that somebody is taking riskier activities, you can choose to associate with them in a different way, maybe online, maybe you meet them outside rather than in person. But if I had framed that as, are your friends lying to you about COVID, or is your spouse lying to you about COVID risks, people wouldn't get it. They would be too afraid of thinking or naming somebody as lying. And so they'd miss the truth, which instead they can get as, oh, wow, right, people have different ways they lead their lives. Let me try to find out about that.
And you'd be doing something else too. You'd be fostering a very distrustful society. But
Yeah. So trust is a tricky word, right? So there's mistrust, and there's even within schema therapy, one of the maladaptive schemas is said to be the mistrust schema, but it's maladaptive, right? So there is a certain adaptiveness of, let me have an investigative schema, and it's hard to figure out what that wording is so that people can be looking to find things out without assuming the worst.
right.
So there's that being open to the imperfections of life and of the people we deal with and of our information without mistrusting everything. So I think of the Trump rally last night. Oh my God, it was so mind-boggling that he is telling people, you don't really need to wear masks.
You don't need to test. Testing is really what's giving us all these cases of COVID.
Right. That the testing is what's giving us COVID. Right.
As if testing causes the disease rather than just exposes what's going on in the world around us. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, so that's a common pattern. I think it comes with writing and submissions as well, right? So people may want to avoid bad news, and therefore he wants to avoid bad news. Don't tell me about the testing. Don't tell me about my polls. Hard to avoid the fact when he looks out at the audience, it's pretty empty, and they had to cancel the event outside because no one wanted to see him outside. But people don't want to look at the kind of bad news sometimes. So I know that for myself, I find it easiest to submit things. If I look back at my 25, 30 years of writing, or more than that, when it's pre-accepted, boom, it gets done and sent off really fast. The more it is something that I'm going to work on it a long time and I have no idea what's going to happen, the harder it is for me both to start it and to finish it and to send it off. I'm wondering if that's still true for you at all, or if you've dealt with people to advise them about that.
So, what's really interesting is, so in the publishing world, things don't usually happen that way. Most everything that is written on assignment. Someone sends a pitch letter or makes a phone call. Basically, there's a pitch, there's some negotiation of what the piece would be, what it would cover. And so the writer is usually writing with the knowledge that the editor is expecting a piece of a certain kind. Now, but there are other forms of writing. So I might decide that I want to submit an op-ed article on a particular topic to the New York Times. I do not know in advance whether my piece will be accepted. I've been writing long enough that I would still pursue my idea. The uncertainty of knowing its fate probably wouldn't enter too much into the writing. But I can see how it could, and I could see how someone getting it might say, "Yeah, this is good, but what about?" And asking, hey, with a little revision, this might be really right on target. But so in the world that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't come up much. I do get pieces submitted to me very rarely that are already written. Someone's written a piece, and depending on who the person is and what the topic is and how the first paragraph reads, I might not read further. Um, but
that's interesting. You bring up a point, and especially actually in the way you were talking earlier with Debbie about her piece, and you had seen part of it, or the idea, you'd seen part of it, and then you encourage her to write more. She's written more, and you tell her it's 90 or 95% there, and you'll give her more feedback. That's interesting because other readers or editors, this is sort of like negotiation, have different expectations of how perfect it should be before it makes its way to them. So I have a friend who's sorry.
That's absolutely true. There are lousy editors in the world, and if a piece isn't like 100% there, they wouldn't know what to do with it. So it's, they're like gatekeepers. They're not really editors. They're just shoveling information, into blank pages in a publication. I don't really consider that editing. Editor might shape a piece. I work with writers. I can also tell on a first draft or something whether I can usually pretty much tell whether someone's going to make it or not. And that's why I was very encouraged by what Debbie did, because I could see how close it was, and also I could see how well the beginning of it was done. It was like, no, this person gets what has to be done. And so I was, it's like you do that exhale. Oh, okay. I'm in the hands of someone who knows how to tell this story. Maybe only 95% of the story is there only. Maybe it's almost all there, but I'm totally confident it's all going to get there. I'm not always that confident, but you're right that some editors won't accept a piece unless it's totally 100%.
Right. They won't look at it a second time, or they're turned off immediately by there being some imperfection. I have a friend who's I have to mask this a little bit. So he's one of the most successful TV producers of all time. And he's a showrunner for several hugely successful shows. And he created them. He created them like out of nowhere. He came up with these ideas. And it's not like one of them actually, let me take that back. One of them is a little bit derivative, and the studio asked him to do it. But the rest of them are so brilliant. And he's very generous. And like you, he speaks to people a lot. And then one time he's talking to me privately. He says, if you ever have anyone who wants me to look at something, I'll look at it. But you have to tell them this. I'll only look at something once. And he says, I don't want to be the killer of dreams. That was his phrase, the killer of dreams. He said, because if somebody sends me something, the only thing I ask myself is it ready for me to take to the studio? And if it's not ready for me to take to the studio, then I just put it aside.
Yeah, but he's like in a different position. I could understand being in that position of, what he's saying is he's not working with someone to develop an idea. He's in a position to say, hey, I can take good ideas and really run with them, but I'm not the development guy. And that's really what he's saying. And look, I mean, that's fine. That's really the perch that he occupies. And there's room for people in different spots along the pathway that things get done and brought from someone's head onto a screen near you. If my job if I were to only look at finished pieces that were 100%, but see, I would not have much to look at. I got an article in from someone last week, 100%. I mean, There was nothing I had to do with it at all. I take it back. I asked for 2 little one-line additions to the article, just little expansions of little points. But that was only after a second read. Well, no, they jumped out at me at a first meeting. Jumped out is a little excessive on my part. They made themselves apparent to me. But I'm in a different business. I'm in a business of starting having ideas as an editor, assigning, excuse me, a lot of my ideas, as well as being open to ideas from others. Listen, I'll make no bones about it. I'm really demanding as an editor. I want information. I want good information. I want good writing. And people understand that, we get along great. And my name doesn't go on it. I'm making other people look good. So it's just my expectations. I work with people who don't know how to do much to an article, and maybe they can cut 10 lines out of something, but they don't have all of those skills to do that. So although they, like me, they would be beginning with having some idea of the territory they want a writer to explore. So it's really a different kind of enterprise from your friend, the showrunner.
Right. He does both, though. I should say that in different contexts.
He's his own developer for his own stuff, but for other stuff, he wants to bring a finished idea, script to a studio. For people he's never worked with before, or he has no ties to, right? That's what's kind of interesting, right? So for other people, got to make sure that this is not revealed who it is. So he spent all this time talking to me about my dog, who would say service dog, and he spent all this time asking questions about her for over an hour at this restaurant, even though there were other people at dinner. I couldn't figure out why. And then afterwards, he says, I've watched you and I've thought for days, this is it. We're going to do a show on service dogs and what they do. By the way, this is not a person who does like documentaries. Oh, I think that's right. I think he's never done documentaries. Maybe he has. That's not his big thing. So there, it was actually the opposite. It was all about, okay, let's sit down. Tell me every association you have. Tell me every possible story idea we could have. And then he's writing them down. So that's a completely different. Yeah, but that's so you were present at the genesis of an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that's creative people, It's like, okay, I'm seeing this as a story that belongs out there, that has wider applicability than this dinner table. So yeah, interesting how we get our ideas and how stories develop, and what we do with information. And sometimes information, he was in a position where he could sort of get all the angles of information and know what to do with the story. And it's just interesting how there's no one way that ideas get developed, and what strikes someone as worthy of a story to tell. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting show about service dogs.
Well, the idea went pretty far with a certain network that he has an exclusive arrangement with. And then someone said, wait a second, didn't we do a show on something else that's the only thing in common with it is that it involves dogs? And they said, that one didn't do so well. Let's kill the idea.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, that's the flip side of this business. Exactly that, where someone who has some power says, oh, yeah, didn't we do something that was so remotely tangentially related to the idea? I mean, there were buzzkills of all kinds, and I mean, happens to the best of us. What can I say? Yeah, there are just those naysayers, of all kinds. So lots of good ideas get killed. But the thing about some of us is that, we keep files with ideas in them, and we go back to them. Maybe there's some other development. You say, okay, this is the moment to haul out that idea, to look at that little slip of paper I threw into a folder 2 years ago. Maybe this is its moment. Or maybe you see something and it's funny and it just sparks an idea and you start bringing it to life again. Yeah, all kinds of ways that ideas come to life for people and work their way into the public domain. So
how do you store your ideas? Like I have my own little system of things that I think I could write about and what I do with them. It's morphed over the years from paper to index cards, and now it's on all these files on my computer.
I have some files on my computer. I have a folder, a literal folder that was part of what I did yesterday. What I did yesterday was I completely reorganized my desk. Here, I have a 7-foot desk. And this is this room that's my office was the bedroom of one of my sons. And it has this huge built-in desk and a bookshelf above the desk. And there's a hole in the back of the desk for all the cords to go down. And it's just a great setup. But I thought it was temporary.
You mean until COVID came?
Well, yeah, I mean, I liked working here, but it was like I rented it. I rented the space. I'd come in here and I'd work, and I worked in the office. And yeah, there were articles that to do when I'm writing an article. I like to get over a certain hump in the idea and in the creation of the article, and then it's easy for me to work in the office. But there's some hard thinking that has to be done at first, and I like to be home and do it, and I don't have to worry about the clock or anything. I just do it on my own schedule. But there were folders of ideas and articles and stuff that I had done, and I figured, no, I've got all my, I've got like 16 of these with research from my last book. They're all very neatly organized here. But I figured I'm in this for the long haul. I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I need another level of organization for all the stuff that's going on now. So I did. I organized everything. I bought this organizer. I moved stuff around, cleaned everything off. And I literally have a folder for ideas. And I throw things in. Very often it's my notes from a conversation with someone where some idea came up that I'm not ready to let go of. I'm not using it for something else. And I think it might work. And, then at some point in the future, on a day when I have nothing else to do, I will go through that folder, and see which ideas still have traction in my brain. And that's generally how I work with ideas. Everybody, there are lots of ideas. It's capturing them and making notes so that capturing it, writing it down or making a note of it. I don't care if it's on a computer or on a mobile device or on a piece of paper. But the funny thing is to write it, to make a short note in the middle of whatever else you're doing so that the note is intelligible when you go back. The worst thing is, I've had notes where I go back and I go, what was that about? So it's like taking the minute to write a little more fully so that you can understand it when the time comes to go back to it. And it's capturing it. And everybody in the world of creativity will tell you it's capturing the ideas. That's really what distinguishes the creative people from the non-creative people. It's just knowing which ones to carry forward. So, and you have some record of them and you make note of them. And, I don't know if you find it to be the case, but, it isn't that my brain is on some timetable of ideas where, oh yes, once a week I reliably have a new idea for a new
right.
I can go periods without really any ideas. And then all of a sudden I can have periods where there are lots of things start making sense to me and start suggesting things. And so I've got a note here. I think I definitely put it into my file on a blog or an op-ed piece I want to write. I better do it before the COVID crisis is over because it has something to do with it. Not entirely, but something. So it's just, for me, it's just a matter of getting time. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's hard to know what the range of ideas are and for me, what level they're at. So I have ideas where it's just a brief idea. So for example, it's not my idea, but a TV show about service dogs and what they do. Well, that's just a very broad idea. Then on the other hand, I have ideas that are very developed. So the ideas for my book are quite developed. They fit into different categories and chapters. So a sub-idea might come up, but I at least know which chapter file to put it in. Right? There are ones like that. And then there are ones in the middle. So forgiveness is an example of that. So forgiveness is something where I'm not quite sure what I want to say about it. I kind of know, but there are big questions that I can't quite figure out. And then I saw something yesterday that popped up on a, God, how did I find this? There's an inventory for forgiveness that someone developed that has 3 subscales. And the person was purporting to say, oh, I know what it was. There was a blog that said, it was a post that said, 5 habits that make you happy. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see what they are. I probably thought of these. And they list forgiveness. And then it says research shows forgiveness makes you happier. But of course, nobody site checks most things, right? Or fact checks it like the New Yorker, the New York Times would. So I click on the link, right? That's not at all what the article really says. The article instead says, how there are different personality characteristics that are associated with forgiveness. So for example, people who are neurotic in terms of big 5 characteristics are less forgiving, and people who are agreeable are more forgiving. I'm like, well, that's really interesting. Okay, let's see what's going on here. And then I looked at it and I looked at what the actual questions were. So I followed a link to that. And I noticed for the first time, because I'd read this research before and thought other things about it, but I never actually looked, this is embarrassing, I never looked at the inventory.
This happens all the time to people, yeah.
So I look at the inventory and then suddenly I have this pretty big epiphany, which is, oh my God, this is ridiculous. This is such ridiculous research because what it says is, if somebody wrongs me, I I tend to forgive them. And I thought, oh my God, there's no
wrong. Yeah, right.
there's no, it's such a broad category that
Right.
I might be thinking, yes, I always forgive people, except if it's a big thing. And somebody else is thinking only of big things, and they think, I don't forgive people, right?
Right.
So unless you know what it is that people have in mind about forgiveness, it makes no sense. So then I had two ideas. Well, one, this makes no sense. This is so ridiculous. And so it doesn't really show what how forgiveness is related to happiness. Two, I thought, well, a much better way of doing this research would be to say, here's a scenario of something that happens. You know, you find out that your beau said he cleans the coffee maker, but you look in the coffee maker and it's not clean. How would you forgive him, right? That would be one scenario. And another might be, you find out that your beau has been cheating on you for the last 30 years, right? That's a different scenario, right? So then you could easily correct for this idea. So that was where I felt, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I wondered, oh, do I want to move this forgiveness piece up in the world of things I write on? And then I thought, nope, I'm going to put it back in the file because I actually want to finish this other project. But it was very exciting because I actually felt like I learned something, but I also had like an agenda of what it is that I want to learn, right? That might be hopeful in thinking about forgiveness.
But you know, I mean, this raises an interesting point, and that is that, I mean, I'm assuming that other people are like me, that I'm not so unique, much as I would like to think so, but that I will put that all the time on topics that I know something to a lot about. I will see a piece of ordinary, you know, or just another piece of information, and somehow or other, I'll look at it a little differently, or there'll be a word that'll catch into my brain, and I'll suddenly see something, and it'll open up an idea for me in a way that wasn't open before. The other thing, I don't know if it's your experience, but my experience every time I've written a book is that my organization of chapters changes after. I mean, there are times when I write a chapter and I realize, no, you know, this doesn't go here, it goes there, or, you know, this was going to be a sub part of a chapter, but no, this is the whole thing unto itself. And
right.
I actually like that evolution when I'm writing. It means that I'm processing things at a deeper level and that I'm rethinking it. And I may not move it in a day, but if the idea persists that this needs to be in a different place, I will, you know, then move it and persuade whoever else I need to persuade that this is where it should be. Usually, you know, one writes a book according to an outline that has more or less been approved by an editor who's contracted for the book. Usually there's not much jockeying about the organization. Usually the writer is free. It's usually pretty well understood that things are going to change in the course of doing. So this has been fun and interesting. Again, a great way to spend a Sunday in the time of coronavirus. I've got to hop on to another call. But I look forward to seeing, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all on Sundays.